With Rutger McGroarty now a Pittsburgh Penguin, are we seeing a trend among younger players who want a little more control over their destiny? We'll talk about that. We have our women's hockey spotlight and what's with Anthony Duclair and his hair. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Friday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. With me every Friday, Rachel Donner of Locked On Flyers. And happy Friday, Rachel.
Happy Friday indeed. I think it is definitely a happy Friday for Rutger McGroarty. That's for sure.
Yes, a new lease on life in his NHL career before it even starts, as he is traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins, signs a contract, an ELC with them within 24 hours of the trade. So his career at the University of Michigan is over. And he is now a professional hockey player. And yet this may be part of sort of a bigger trend. So let's talk about the specifics and the trend. First of all, do you think the Jets got a fair deal as far as what they got in return from the Penguins?
I mean, I think so, but I just think with trading guys who have never played a game in the NHL, like, you cannot evaluate this trade in good faith, in my opinion. I think that you can say, sure, it seems okay on paper or not, depending on what your opinion is of it. And I guess that's the case with all trades, to be honest, but there's no hard evidence about performance for either of these guys at an NHL level. And so you just have to say, yeah, seems fair, or no, I think one team got the better of the deal, but absolutely say, we got to wait like 3 years before we can evaluate this trade in any like reasonable way.
Yeah, 3 years minimum, probably. I mean, when you sort of add it all up, and then when you take into consideration that defensemen tend to take a little longer to develop than forwards, you may even need more time. But I mean, essentially what the trade involves is one top prospect from one organization for another top prospect for another organization.
Exactly. And, we've seen this come up more than once in recent years where prospects are sort of asserting themselves a little bit more, saying the team that drafted me is not where I want to make my career. And, I think with the NHL at all levels of trades, if a player says, I want out, I think most teams try to negotiate a deal in good faith to get them what they want. Like, you can say NHL management are not monsters. In some ways they are and have been, but also, they try in good faith to make a deal that works for them. But, we saw at the tail end of last season with the Flyers and Ducks, where Cutter Gauthier got sent to Anaheim before playing a single game for the Flyers, didn't sign. And so, the Flyers got Jamie Drysdale, an active NHL player, in return, which is interesting that it was, prospect for active player. There was like other little bits of the trade with picks, I think. But, the point stands is that these younger players, especially the college players, are starting to assert themselves a little bit more to try and control their own destiny a little.
And you can't blame them. I mean, players want to control their own destiny. They want to have a say in where they work and what the working conditions are and all of that. But, there's a lot of questions that come up when you start talking about this. First of all, now that college players have 4 years that they can be under team control, is that a loophole that the owners are going to try to close in the next collective bargaining agreement because junior players don't have that much time?
Right. So they only have 2 years in the juniors, 4 years for college. And the NCAA is more and more becoming the place to go for development. I think that a lot of players are seeing the advantage of playing in the college game as opposed to juniors, and some Europeans are coming over to play the college game just to get, a little more advanced time to adjust to the North American game. And with some college players obviously being older, being, 21, 22, 23, they're bigger and stronger. And so you get an opportunity to play against better developed players and improve your game even more. That 4 years can potentially feel, I think a little confining to these guys.
Yeah, it can. And then there's other advantages, I think, to college over junior as well, in addition to getting a college education if you want to avail yourself of
Sure.
that.
Well, there's that too. Right?
There's that too. And potentially without paying for it because you get a scholarship. So that's another advantage. But you're playing 30 to 40 games as opposed to 60 to 70 games in juniors. That creates, I think less travel, less wear and tear on your body. And then again, you are playing against older players. I think those are also some competitive advantages that colleges can offer over juniors.
Yeah, I mean, with the number of games, I think, it's sort of a catch-22 there because you do play fewer games, so it's less wear and tear. But I think it's easier to adjust from a 60-something game season to an 82 game season than it is from a 35 to 40 game season up to the 82. So, you could take that either way. But I think that especially in the next CBA, like you said, our owner's going to want to assert themselves a little bit more and maintain rights of junior players longer. But on the other side, is the Players Association going to fight to say NCAA rights are only held for 2 or 3 years? Like, knock that down, because players are more and more, as we see NCAA hockey as a prime training ground and development spot for players. Is it going to go the way of the NBA where, some college guys only play for 1 year and then turn pro? Are they going to want more flexibility in terms of where they go? And I think that'll be the case, where NCAA is a development spot, much like junior hockey, and not a 4-year college degree that it used to be more, right?
Yeah, that definitely, could be a trend. And then what will the NCAA and the colleges say about that? Hey, we want a commitment from you. We want to make sure you stay at least 2 years or 3 years. I mean, from our standpoint, how do we develop our teams knowing that everybody's leaving so quickly? So there's a lot of parties involved who want to have a say, and it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But I think, right now, having that ability over a 4-year period to then say, hey, I'm not happy with the direction of the Jets organization, I want out. And GMs really don't have a choice, because you don't want a malcontent poisoning your organization's locker room. So it's, they're in a no-win situation as far as having to trade these guys.
Yeah. And so is it just I don't want to play for you situation, and that's how they do it? Or is it something that they're going to negotiate into the CBA to make it more accessible without making it look like you don't like who drafted you? Right. And just create some animosity amongst the fans of the team that drafted you. Now, with the Jets, you can say, well, I understand that the team is kind of in this weird floaty spot right now, right? So it makes sense. But also, if you're a Jets fan, you're like, how are we supposed to get better if these guys that we draft that have potential don't want to play here, right? So I think there's a lot to it. And, we've had situations where players who go to college who either, some are undrafted, but some are drafted, but don't really like their late round picks, for instance, but then kind of develop they're late bloomers, right? And
Right.
so their sophomore, junior year, all of a sudden things click and they're looking like there's more of a potential for them to be an NHL player. And then they're like, well, now I got to hold out to be a free agent, and play the extra year in college. Do we want to give them the flexibility to leave college early while the iron is hot and they've hit that peak performance, say their junior year, and they're ready to leave because they don't think their school is going to win a national championship the next year? Like, I think there's something to that too. I've seen plenty of college players, run out the clock on these drafted teams because, it gives them an extra chance to maybe go for that national championship. But some schools aren't going to be at that point, but they have individual standout players.
Yeah. And then, the other issue that sort of attaches to all of this, and you mentioned this about Winnipeg, organizations that are having difficulty or that maybe are not well run, how do they get better if players who they draft just say, hey, I don't want to go there? You end up with a league of haves and have-nots, and that's not good for competitive balance. So there's a lot of factors to be considered when trying to figure out the future of this situation.
There is definitely a to be continued. Obviously, the new CBA is a few years off.
Yes, and we'll see in what direction it goes. We have got a lot more to get to on today's show. Erica Ayala will join us with our women's hockey spotlight, talking with Amanda Kessel. And we also will be discussing Anthony Duclair and the fact that he had to cut his hair before Islanders training camp. We've got all that and a lot more coming up on this episode of the Locked On NHL podcast.
We are driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. One of the things I love about Indeed is it makes hiring all in one place so easy. You can avoid all that busy work. I use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. Listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on Locked On NHL. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
It is undoubtedly a great week if you are a part of the Kessel family, specifically if you are Amanda Kessel. Hi, my name is Erica Ayala, bringing you another women's hockey spotlight as part of Locked On NHL. I am, of course, also the host of Locked On Kraken, so make sure you give us a listen. But I want to talk to you about Amanda Kessel. If you're not familiar with Amanda Kessel, then you should be. Now, Amanda Kessel has been a fantastic player. She came back from several concussion setbacks that she suffered in college to go on to be a multiple-time Olympian, a gold medalist with the 2018 team. And now she has recently, just this week, been promoted to the assistant general manager with the AHL Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, as well as the Penguins manager of minor league operations. Now, Amanda Kessel has been with the Pittsburgh Penguins organization for about a year now and has been doing great. Kyle Dubas had great things to say about her, specifically around the time that she was drafted to PWHL Montreal team at 41st overall. Now, I want to stop there for a minute because if you're familiar with Amanda's game, then you know she's not a 41st overall pick. She should go much higher in any draft. If you're not familiar with her game, let me just put it this way. You might have heard that after a 20-year drought, Team USA Hockey on the women's side won their first Olympic gold medal back in 2018, Pyeongchang. At the time, we still had the Lamoriello twins playing hockey, and we had the oops, I did it again goal to win gold for the United States. I'll just say this. The United States would not have been in a position to win in a shootout once again against Canada if Amanda Kessel had not buried her shootout goal. She has been fantastically consistent for the United States, underrated, I think, because of some of the bigger draws and the bigger names, not necessarily, in my opinion, the better players. Hot take it or leave it. But Amanda Kessel has been that girl, that woman for USA Hockey for quite some time. She also played a little bit in the NWHL with the Riveters. Now, she was in and out of her season with the Rivs because of her commitments to USA Hockey, and I think also kind of some lingering injuries at the time. Amanda Kessel did not play in the PWHL last year, so you didn't see her get one of those core designations that we talked about with Sarah Nurse or like Elise Steckline for Minnesota, Kendall Coyne Schofield, etc. But in my estimation, she is absolutely on par with those players. Some of them have been her teammates. Some of them have been her long-term, opposition for Hockey Canada. But Amanda Kessel is definitely worthy of that. So why did she go 41st overall? Well, I think a little bit of this has to do with her prior commitments to Pittsburgh. And we do know going into the PWHL's inaugural season at the top of this year that everything from the collective bargaining agreement to how the league was set up and the fight for this league to get going was all in service of making this league not only the one women's professional hockey league, but the one league where women could be paid as pros. Now, that being said, we've talked about the contracts before, and there is a maximum of 6 players that can make a minimum of, I believe it's around $80K, somewhere around there. And those are guaranteed contracts. Now, $80K for a women's league definitely puts them in the higher echelon of what we've seen in women's hockey in the past. And that's a minimum guarantee. So effectively, if you look at the WNBA contracts, we're kind of looking at like the veteran core salary, which is about $122K. And, so still behind the WNBA, but that's only 6 players that can make that. There are also designations in the WNBA where you really just can't afford to pay everyone at that amount. And so the average salary is still much lower than what you would expect for a professional athlete. And quite honestly, even for professional women's sports, where we see in the WNBA and especially the NWSL, salaries continue to rise as more sponsorship dollars, as more broadcast deals come to fruition. So when it comes to Amanda Kessel, reading the tea leaves a little bit here, and then also going off of some of what we heard after she was drafted, I think if you're PWHL Montreal, you don't want to miss out on the opportunity to get Amanda Kessel, who had declared for the draft, made herself available, so was obviously interested to see what was happening. But you also don't want to effectively, quote unquote, lose a draft pick or tap out financially by coring someone who might not be available for all PWHL games. Now, in the past, in other leagues, we've seen that leagues have worked with players. And we actually have seen this in the PWHL. You might have players that are kind of part-time or considered reserve players because of their commitments elsewhere. And I'm not exactly sure where Amanda Kessel falls on all of this, but I just want to give you this information to kind of understand what we're seeing and what could potentially be either Kessel joining the PWHL, maybe deciding not to join the PWHL, or is there something in between? We just don't know yet. But I want to give a stick tap over to the Hockey News because they followed up with Danielle Savignon, who is the PWHL Montreal general manager. And this is the quote that was given to the Hockey News. Quote, I was made aware of Amanda Kessel's nomination, along with the Pittsburgh Penguins general manager Kyle Dubas's declaration to the fact that the decision to pursue her playing career belongs to her and that he will support her decision. I hope to see Amanda in a Montreal uniform this upcoming season so that all PWHL fans can appreciate her talent on the ice. That makes two of us, Danielle. I am dying to see Amanda Kessel cut it up in this league. I don't think we've ever really seen her tap out her full potential in a professional league. And as I've already mentioned, at the international stage, unfortunately, I think she gets overshadowed by other names that, in my estimation at least, are not better than her at hockey. So it's going to be interesting to see where Amanda Kessel falls. Just a reminder that Dubas told DK Sports Pittsburgh, or DK Pittsburgh Sports, after Amanda was drafted, quote, I don't want to speak for Amanda, and she's been outstanding in our front office. It's a tough one because the PWHL finally started getting rolling, and it's a great avenue for women to play and be rewarded financially for their talents. So I'd like to see Amanda live that out and make sure that she's happy on that front. But at the same time, we'd love for her to stay in the front office. She was outstanding in the year on so many fronts, and her potential on the front office side is unlimited. She can run her own NHL team one day. Just the progress that she's made this year has been spectacular. So we'll see what happens there. That's Amanda's own personal thing, and we're supportive either way. So that was after Amanda was drafted back in June. And this promotion just came this week. So I think it really gives Amanda some options. If I had to guess, she'll probably get paid a little bit better with the Pittsburgh Penguins than she might with PWHL Montreal. But again, how much is she committed to showing that she can still be an elite level hockey player? How committed is she to being a part of the growth of this league? And I want to pause there, because whether it's Amanda Kessel or quite honestly anyone else, it really shouldn't be up to the players alone, and arguably at all, especially early on, to feel the burden of making this league successful. You really want the athletes to do the best that they can to be the best athlete that they can. And if you select your team properly as a general manager, if you set up the marketing correctly as a league front office, then if, just to use Amanda as an example, if Amanda Kessel does everything she needs to do to be an elite level athlete, then the product should speak for itself. Or you have people that are speaking on behalf of Amanda Kessel's amazing talent on the ice. So if Amanda Kessel doesn't decide to come to the PWHL, I don't think that should be an indictment on how she feels necessarily about the league. Not necessarily. And I don't think it should be an indictment on how much she, quote unquote, believes in or wants to promote the future of women's hockey. And, I've gotten to cover Amanda Kessel when she played for the Riveters. And I really respect that. From my interactions with her, Amanda Kessel wants to be a hockey player. She wants to talk about hockey things. She understands, and I think she's grown into being comfortable talking about the hashtag or quote unquote grow the game movement. But I don't ever feel that she was the kind of player that was going to on her own take that on. Now you compare that to a Kendall Coyne-Schofield, a Hillary Knight, a Sarah Nurse, and again, there is a role, and an important role, that those players have played and will continue to play. And those are the players that people recognize, even if they're just casually or quite honestly not at all following women's hockey. So it's not that one path is better or worse. You just have to know what your role is and what you're comfortable doing. And I love that, at least in their quotes, both the Penguins and PWHL Montreal are saying that they're going to leave this decision up to Amanda Kessel. So what will she decide? I guess we'll just have to wait and find out. And if you want to hear more about Amanda Kessel from the Pittsburgh Penguins perspective, make sure to go listen to Locked On Penguins.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. And look, my favorite feature on Game Time remains the view from your seat. You can go on the app and get a panoramic view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So one other thing that kind of made the news, a little social media post by New York Islanders forward Anthony Duclair, shaving off, cutting his dreads, and the facial hair has to go because the New York Islanders, his new hockey team, has a strict no long hair, no facial hair policy, except during the playoffs when you're allowed to grow that playoff beard. It would help if the Islanders were actually in the playoffs long enough to allow players to grow them, but that's a different issue. But Rachel, your thoughts on the Islanders' rules and how it affects Anthony Duclair?
Yeah, it is interesting because you look at it from two different perspectives, right? For me, he signed a contract. It's not like he was traded there under duress, right? He actively chose to sign with the New York Islanders. He understands that with Lou Lamoriello as the GM, these are the conditions of that contract. So, it's sad. It made me deeply sad to see that photo. But he's a New York Islander, and that's part of the deal. Now, is it outdated and stupid, in my opinion? Absolutely. I think the policy is dumb. And there's more to it, but you cover the Islanders regularly. What's the feeling on it from inside the house, so to speak?
Well, I think most fans don't like the hair policy. I mean, Lou originally got it via George Steinbrenner and his friendship with the late Yankees owner, who I was never a big fan of either, but that's a different issue. And the Yankees have had that policy for many, many years. I personally, I understand both sides to an extent. I understand if I own a company or a business, I want my employees to represent the business in a certain way. But at the same time, it just seems like there's a big gap between short hair to the extreme and no facial hair and still looking neat and presentable to the world. I just think that it's just a lot more restrictive than it needs to be, the way the situation is set up.
Right. And, the elephant in the room here about all of this is there are absolutely racial aspects to this situation because, you and I both live in New York State. I remember very specifically when the Crown Act was passed, and it was designed to make sure that grooming regulations at jobs didn't interfere with cultural practices. And dreadlocks are a protective hairstyle that are used most often by Black people as a way to maintain their hair in an effective way, but also have cultural implications to it. There's a cultural aspect to it. And so it's a little dicey because does Lou Lamoriello's regulation violate the Crown Act that exists in New York State? And, you can say, why is there this special law? Well, if you have cultural practices that prevent you from employment, that's employment discrimination, right? And so is this employment discrimination in effect? But what's your take on it and the general Islanders community consensus?
I think the general Islanders community doesn't like the rule, finds it overly restrictive. And look, theoretically, that rule could prevent certain players who want to have facial hair or long hair or dreads or whatever the case may be from signing with the Islanders, because they just don't want to deal with those regulations and those rules. It did not obviously deter Anthony Duclair in this
Right.
situation, because he went in with his eyes open, signed the contract. Look, essentially, Duclair traded away his dreads and his facial hair for a 4-year deal, which would give him a certain amount of security, which he hasn't had. He's been on a lot of teams, and to reunite with a coach he played for in juniors. So, and $3.5 million a
Well,
year.
that too, right? If he's
Can't
getting
forget
paid
that.
$3.5 million to cut his hair.
Yeah,
you
I'd
know.
do it. I would do it, but there's no cultural significance to my haircut, so I'm not
Fair.
going to go down that road. But I mean, that was the trade-off. He went in with his eyes open. Does it violate the law? It's, I mean, it's a gray area. I
Mhm.
think it's not a clear-cut yes or no answer. But the fact is that, Anthony Duclair signed that contract knowing that those were the rules. To me, there's also another aspect to it, and maybe this is not as, significant as the elephant in the room that you mentioned previously, but the NHL wants to market its players better, having them have a personality, whether it's dreads, long hair, dressing flamboyantly, does help market your players to an extent. And making everyone wear suits, identical suits, and short hair and no facial hair kind of takes away from that personality that fans can identify more readily with the players if they stand out a little bit more.
Yeah, I can see that. It is important, as we've said on this show, to really market the players as individuals. I think that other leagues have been very successful in doing that, and the NHL doesn't as much. They do it to some degree, but there's kind of a lane that all of these players are in, and you can't help but think that Duclair's a great player. Is he elite top? No, but he's a very good player.
Yeah.
And he absolutely could and should be used to market the New York Islanders. And when you say here's a black man who plays in the NHL, which there are not a ton of, there are some, but it is definitely overwhelmingly white in the league, and you take away something that is of cultural significance to black people in order to have him play in your league. I think that says a lot about the league and how you market the league as inclusive, right? It's not just about the utilizing individual players as marketing tools just in general. It's about sending a message like, is this league inclusive?
Well, I mean, from Lou Lamoriello's perspective, it's all about the crest on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. That's what he would say. I'm not arguing for it, but that would be his answer. And that is traditionally, at least, part of hockey culture. Yeah, lots to unpack with that situation. I want to thank everyone for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. Now, check out Locked On NHL Prospects. You can learn about some of the top players who will be in the NHL in the future on that podcast with our experts. And it's something that is on all year long. So if you're a big hockey fan, definitely check out Locked On NHL Prospects. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's going to do it for us today. I want to thank Erica Ayala for giving us the bi-weekly Women's Hockey Spotlight. I will be back on Monday talking to 3 of our local hosts about some of the biggest stories from around the NHL. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL Podcast.